Good morning, everyone. It's Joker, and today we are back with another slime video, and finally getting around to it. But with all the content dropping, and especially Jubilee taking place at the same time, I had to prioritize other videos. So we had 18 different skill fusions with this most recent update, with the drop of Isis and Kyoko and Milim and Guy. Now, all of these skill fusions are pertaining to OCTAGRAM Demon Lord, which is crazy. And, skipping ahead, we do have our first batch of EX unit skill fusions. Now, thing I want to point out before we even get started into this is that the skill fusions for the EX characters, they do not have to be level 120 to do it. So like this Rimuru, he is level 108. Yeah, 108. So you do not have to max out the EX characters to actually skill fuse them, which I think is very, very good. Because obviously maxing out EX units is not a thing that a lot of people can do. But the older 5-star characters still do need to be level 100. So I guess the requirement is you have to be level 100 across the board, regardless of what kind of unit you are. So these units, and then the second batch of units, still need to be level 100, still need to be fully duped out, which is unfortunate, but at least the EX ones don't need it. So let's go through. I've got them all translated up, plus they're in-game, so we can look at them as we talk about them. But this is going to be a long video, because we have 18 different units to talk about, and I don't feel like splitting this up into two. So if you're looking for a particular unit and my very quick opinion on it, then I'll put timestamps for each character, and you can just kind of go through and take a peek. But starting out, we have the Dark 1.0 Rimuru, who is an AoE Dark character. And his skill fusion is actually his second skill, because his first skill was technically already skill fused. All of these old 5-star characters, this is their second batch of skill fusions. So it's first stun. Currently, it's 100% stun evasion and 10% blue orb damage. They completely reworked it into giving him the Lord's Ambition ability, which Commander Diablo has and the new Protector Guy gives to everybody, where for 2 turns you nullify pretty much every debuff the enemy could put on you, and then at the end of the turn, they stack a 10% weakness resistance down on the enemy, which can stack forever. And then on top of that, lowers AoE crit resistance by 30% for 2 turns, which goes fairly well with his other skill when it's skill fused, which gives him a whole bunch of crit and stuff. So crit rate and crit damage is just a higher percentage. So it's just doubling down on the crit while keeping him immune to certain effects like nerfing crit damage or something. It's fine, and especially when all these 5-stars can become EX characters in December, it means that he will be a viable dark nuking character who's focused on crit, so he could see a resurgence in value back then. Did I say back then? I meant in the future. Whatever. Moving on to Wind Lumi, still a fairly good character, healing and special converting for greens. Now she's a little bit more versatile because this is for her orb change ability, and it's currently 1 blue and 1 orange into 2 greens, and then a 10% gauge increase for green orbs. After this new skill fusion, she can convert any 2 orbs into green. So it could be 2 oranges, it could be 2 blues, it could be 1 orange and 1 blue like it currently is right now. But it's not specific anymore, which makes her very versatile. And it bumps her gauge increase up to 20%, which is great because it's the same cost of skill. It's just now not locked to 1 and 1, and it's giving double the gauge increase. So this is a very good skill fusion for a character who still has pretty decent viability in the current game if you need a converter and also a healer for like the Vengeance team or something. She's going to work really well there. All right, stupid goddamn Maid Rimuru. They did a sneaky thing with him, and they gave him 2 skill fusions at the same time. He didn't have any to begin with. And they're like, all right, Dark Rimuru, you get another one. Lumi gets her other skill. Maid Rimuru, you suck so bad that we're going to give you both at the same time. I'm not I'm not 100% serious there. Maid Rimuru is objectively a good character for a defense team. I just hate his guts. So please excuse my personal bias here. Two skill fusions though. So let's go in order. His first skill is 25 points and gives everybody 25% defense and 30% max HP, which, I mean, if you're running the Almesia and Prosper Lumi team, Almesia's given you 100% max extra HP. This Rimuru, I think, has been relegated to being good for sweaty tryhards in Valor Cup, where more maximum HP and you can heal up to it means more points to, be number one or number two in Valor Cup. It doesn't have a lot of bearing in normal, like, everyday PvE content. The defense certainly does. It's for 3 turns, but max HP is not something people are really going for when just doing tower or doing conquest or something. Now the skill has gotten, it's slightly better. They haven't really changed the spirit of it. Now that he hits 30% defense for everybody for 3 turns and 50% max HP for 3 turns. So they've just slightly increased the, well, I say slightly, max HP went up 20%. The defense only went up 5. Again, I mean, defense is cool. Max HP, 99.9% of people don't care about. His second skill is a bit more impactful. Currently, it gives 25% guard power and 5% stacking green orb damage. Like, whoop-de-doo. That is just useless. And guard power means you need to be guarding. So you need to be running Protector Maribel, or you need to have Vengeance Raphael, or the skill-fused Light Shizu to give yourself a chance to guard. Now, it's gotten quite a bit better. So it's gone up to 30% guard power for 3 turns, and it used to be 1 turn. So you got 5% extra guard power and 2 extra turns out of that, which means that when you were guarding, you will take less damage. It doesn't save you from ult damage, because ults bypass guard, but his first skill giving you extra defense will help you tank that a little better. And then they completely removed the stupid stacking orb damage and replaced it with 50% ult resistance up for 3 turns, which, on top of his 30% defense he's giving you, means that you will tank ults very well, and you will also tank normal attacks very well, as long as you're guarding. So objectively, this is a very good skill, because the Vengeance team is all about guarding with Raphael and being defensive and staying alive and waiting for the thunderbolts from the sky to kill everything. This will help you tank not only normals, especially if the enemy has guard penetration skills, but also their high-powered ults. Like, you can seal them, but enemies nowadays, in order to get around the Vengeance mechanic and the Vengeance team, they buff space or element attack. They buff synergy, things that Raphael cannot seal and cannot protect you against. They're doing that now. Or if not, just outright stopping you from using body and spirit skills. So this 50% is the same 50% that Skill Fused Earth Trainee gives, and we know how good that skill is. So this is, I think, even better for the Vengeance team, for, no joke right there. Overall, I think he got very good skill fusions. His first skill, I think, is not as impactful as his second, but for a fully defensive focused character, he now has very defensive focused skills. So I can't really complain or argue against that, even though I want to. Alright, next is Fire 1.0 Milim, the first ever crit, team-wide crit character, and it's hitting her orb change, which is not super impressive. It's 1 orb, so 1 green to 1 blue, and a 10% gauge increase. It's not very huge, and after the skill fusion now, it is any New Year's Blessing or Octagram Demon Lord orb. So it doesn't matter if it's green, it doesn't matter if it's orange, as long as it's a New Year's Blessing character or an Octagram Demon Lord, which there's quite a few of these now, it can become a blue orb and still gives 10% gauge increase. So it didn't really do that much, and it just gave her the ability to change an orange orb instead of a green, but it's now locked to 2 different forces. I'm not entirely sure I'm a fan of this skill. It just didn't change enough. Like, It's a single orb change. What can you do to it? Not really that much, unless you make the secondary effect stupid busted. So it's not very impressive, but it wasn't a very impressive skill to begin with. So I, sure, whatever. I guess it's cool. I wouldn't waste resources on this though. I would just leave her as a dedicated green and not have to feed in a whole bunch of enhancement materials to her. All right, next up is Fire Guy, Fire Gi. His alt buff was skill fused, so currently it's 50% alt damage across the board and 20% crit resistance down. This, if you are critting, does more, or helps you do more damage than a straight up 70% alt buff because crit is a better multiplier. But after the skill fusion, it now changes to 100%, but only for fire units. And then the crit resistance down jumps up to 40%. So he's doubling both of his effects, but the alt buff is now locked to a fire team, which I'm not really running this guy off of a fire team to begin with. So I think it's fine. I don't know if I would skill fuse him, considering we have other characters, EX characters coming out that are doing 120%, 100% unrestricted, 80% with guaranteed crit is like Warrior's Mind Guy, who came out over a year ago. So it's good for a fire team if you're going to run a dedicated fire team for something. Apart from that, I mean, objectively, it's better. Obviously, it's doubled its effects on both sides, but it's become locked to a specific team, and I'm not super hyped about that. If it had been like one extra element, fire and light, or fire and space or something, maybe I could see a little bit extra value there. But as it is, it's very powerful, but it's heavily limited now. So I'm not too sure I'm a fan of this, but I would have to fuse him and really test it out to see how much bonus damage we're getting off of this. I don't know if I'm going to do that, though. And the final unit of the first batch, Space Milim, one of my most favorite Milim units to ever come out in the game, gets just a little bit better. And when I say a little, I mean a little. So this is now affecting her Drago skill, which is Drago, which Exalted Champion Velzard does, which is what the new Awakened Isis EX Unbound unit does, where it increases the percentage of a buff placed on a character by 20%. So a 100% magic buff is now 120%. A 50% element buff or attack buff is now 60%. And it applies across the board for any buff that's placed on the character. And so currently, she did it to herself, which means her 20% attack buff was actually 24% or something like that. Now, after skill fusion, it becomes Drago for OCTAGRAM Demon Lord or Dragon Hakai characters, which still includes herself, but now opens it up to 2 whole forces, and then she gives herself a 40% attack buff. So she's doubling the amount of attack that she gave herself, and she's opening up Drago to a number of other characters, which is impactful, because some of those characters can really benefit off of Drago, especially magic characters right now. So I think this is a good skill fusion. I probably will skill fuse her, because, you know, her giving the space buff and her own personal magic buff plus Drago, which is now a higher attack percentage, and it applies to multiple units. I think this is a good skill fusion. It's still kind of niche. She's still kind of a niche character. She's meant to be a nuking character. So this, you know, this is technically classified as a support buff now, but I don't know if I would use her as a dedicated support option. But it certainly is better than what it previously was. Next, Sneaky, Light 2.0 WM Rimuru, just like Maid Rimuru, got 2 skill fusions in this batch. So both of his skills have been changed. So starting with his first skill, it is a pierce resistance down by 30% for 2 turns on a single target, and then he gives green orbs a 50% buff to alt gauge for 1 turn. And, you know, for the Bride 1.0 team, you know, Light 2.0, whatever you want to call it, this is a pretty good skill. It helps Xion do a lot more damage because of the pierce resistance down, and it was able to rush alts pretty efficiently. Now with the skill fusion, it's doing everything just a bit better, because at level 10, it's now 30% pierce resistance down, still on a single target, but now it's for 3 turns, so it got an extra turn there, which is nice. And then instead of just giving alt gauge, it gives every gauge 50% increase for 3 turns instead of 2. Or instead of 1, actually. So we got an extra turn on the pierce resistance down. The percentage did not go up. The skill cost remained the same. And then instead of 1 gauge increase, they got all 3. And it's for 3 turns now. So this is a much, much better skill. I don't know if he'll be making an appearance on any new EX teams that are Pierce focused that are green, because there's not that many. But this is a much, much better skill nowadays. His second skill is a single orb change. So currently it changes 1 orange to 1 green and gives green orbs 15% damage, which is kind of, yeah, I mean, it's something. But after the skill fusion, it becomes, I don't know if I like it. So he now changes any light character or Octagram Demon Lord orb into a green. So it could be an orange, it could be a blue, as long as it's a light character's orb or an Octagram Demon Lord's orb. So it's not locked to orange anymore, but it is locked now to light or Octagram demons. So he's cool, sure, whatever. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. And then his 15% damage buff got increased to 50%. So quite a hefty jump right there. I'm not sure if I like trading a lock for a lock. At least I know this is going to be an orange. Now if I'm running him and there are no other like it's not his orb, right? So if he's running on the Bride team, then yeah, most of them are light characters. But as I don't really know how I feel about this skill fusion. Next is Space Leon, who started the whole push towards AoE characters being actually good and useful. The Space 2.0 meta was the very first one where Jubilees started having AoE fights, and he's been kind of pushed off to the side because he's quite old. But this is hitting his alt buff skill, so currently it's an 80% personal alt buff, and then it also does 100% instant damage to the enemy, which is a very niche thing, and it's not overly useful at this point. And I think they recognize that because they changed it. They also dropped the cost down from 25 points down to 15, and now they're giving himself 100% alt buff, so an extra 20% there, and then increases Space or Octagram Demon Lord AoE damage by 30%. So that is huge. 30% AoE is a lot more impactful than just a normal attack buff because it's a multiplicative buff, not an additive buff. And if that doesn't make sense to you, just know that it's a lot stronger. And that's the only important part. If you were to give a character a 30% attack buff and a 30% AoE buff side by side, the 30% AoE buff is going to get you a lot more damage if you're doing an AoE ult. So this skill, I think, is fairly good. Space and Octagram Demon Lord, this is still for himself. Maybe when he gets his EX version, this could become a lot more impactful because he'll have an EX ult, and that'll be very strong. We'll have to see what his stats look like once he gets EX. I don't know if he's going to match what old characters do, or he's just going to meet like a base level 100 EX character. He could be a pretty reliable AoE space nuker, who we don't have a lot of those right now, but we do have a few physical ones with Lumi and Violet. We'll have to see. I think it's a good skill, and I think he could contribute quite a bit once he becomes an EX character, but like right now as an old 5-star, I wouldn't do it. Milim, Dark Milim, first anniversary Milim, who is still a very good character to this day. She's got 70% alt buff. Her first skill fusion gave Dark allies a 25% attack buff instead of giving herself a 15%. And now they're fusing her special convert for the orb change, which is going to act just like Wind Lumi does. So currently it changes 1 blue and 1 orange to 2 greens, and then gives permanent 5% extra skill points to a cap of 100. You're never going to see this, by the way, but she does stack skill points slowly but surely. And now, after the conversion, it just changes 2 non-green orbs to 2 green. So again, it could be a special convert, it could be 2 blue orbs, it could be 2 orange orbs, but whatever it is, they will become green. And now she's stacking by 10%, up to a cap of 500%. So she's giving you 10% or 5% extra skill points, and it's capped out a lot higher. So I think this is good. It makes her very even more generic now, because alt buff, dark attack if you need it, but an unrestricted orb change is very, very good for a number of green teams that are not just dark focused, but need an alt buff, are focused on greens, and like Exalted Champions, this could work wonders for that team, because they don't have an alt buffer technically. So I think she's going to be really, really useful with this skill fusion. Next is the first anniversary Rimuru that came out with Milim. This is doing his gimmick skill, the absorption skill. So currently, for 2 turns, you put yourself into like a kind of a counter state where if an enemy ults you, you will not take damage, and you will instead absorb that ult and turn it into your own ult gauge. It only works for 1 ult, but it lasts for 2 turns. So if you know that an enemy is going to ult the next turn, but you don't have a lot of points, you could pop this skill a turn early and still benefit from it. But if you're fighting an AoE fight and 3 ults are coming at you, well, he's going to take the first one, but then you're still going to get hit by the other 2. And it's 70 points, and then it stacked skill point increase by 10% up to a cap of 100, which just adds up with the other skills. So it's not like you could use this, it's only once per fight. But after fusion, it's still the absorption. They didn't change anything to that. It's still 2 turns. It's still 70 points. But that 10% stacking thing, they got rid of that stupid. They got rid of it. And now he lowers AoE ult resistance by 50% for 3 turns. That is huge. 50% ult resistance down is a very powerful skill. And the fact that it's there for 3 turns means you can pop this and forget about it if you want to. And stay protected from an ult that may or may not kill you. We don't know. Still only once per fight, though. So it's still very much a gimmick. I don't know if I would ever use it just because of the ult resistance down when other characters exist who are doing that. Like the new Isis, 120% down if you're within 5 turns. I mean, it's certainly something. I don't know if I would skill fuse him for it, though, because how often do you use this gimmick right now? And almost never. So I don't see myself using it for this skill and putting the resources into it. So it is a much better skill, because the first part with the stacking skill points, that was just a waste. Now it's better. I still don't think it's going to be used that much. Light Milim got her orb change skill fused, and I'm kind of on the fence about it, because it still works the same way. They did make it more expensive. So currently, she is a self-converting character, so if you're running a blue team and you have a lot of orbs for one character, you could bring this Milim in, and all those orbs you can then turn into blues, because they're all her orbs now. And she gave 10% gauge increase. I mean, these units have uses. Visions of Coleus Rimuru comes in, turns all orbs of his to blue, and then he has a rainbow skill on top of that, where he turns all blues to rainbow. So he's meant to, double convert there. Milim converted her own orbs. Now, she's converting all New Year's Blessing orbs, which still includes her, because she's still New Year's Blessing. But now if you're running a full New Year's Blessing team, like the Light 3.0 team, she's just going to convert everything, no matter what, as long as they're all New Year's. And that's why they increased the cost to 35 points, because all of the other full conversion skills for like Prosper Lumi or Tempest Elite Shuna, they all do full converts for specific teams, and they cost 35 points. So they're going to bring this Milim in line with this. Now it applies to New Year's Blessing, and still gives a 10% gauge increase. So I think it's a better skill. It still does what it used to do. It just does it better. I'm just not a fan of increasing skill costs, but I understand why they did it, because it is a very powerful skill now. So that's why I'm kind of on the fence. I don't know if I'm going to do it. I don't know if I won't do it. I'm going to have to think long and hard about it, but it is objectively quite a bit better. I think we've proven that someone at Bandai Namco does not like Lumi. We have had a lot of Lumis who are just not super good, even when they're brand spanking new, and they kind of become memes. The best Lumi still to this day is probably OCTAGRAM Lumi, and she came out years ago. Prosper Lumi, I mean, is useful. She does have uses, but she's horribly limited. Light Lumi got her light buff skill fuse, and the only thing they did this entire skill is give her 20% light buff, because it's currently 60 and now it goes up to 80, and that's literally all they did. And they thought that'd be okay. They didn't touch the cost. They still left the awakened part as stun resistance down after 8 turns have passed, and you can only use a skill once per fight. Like, they couldn't have made it AoE stun resistance down. They couldn't have made it for multiple turns or something, so you could fire and forget, and maybe you could have used it more than once per fight. No. You get 20% light buff, and you're gonna like it. So, do not skill fuse this Lumi. It's trash. It's absolutely garbage. And the Lumi hater who works at Bandai strikes again. And now we move into the EX skill fusions, the very first batch ever of EX skill fusions. And again, reiterating, they do not have to be fully duped out to like 120 to skill fuse them. You could have them at base level 100, and they could be skill fused, which is a really, really nice thing. But Fountain Wisdom Rimuru is skill fusing his orb change. So currently 2 oranges to 2 blues and 10% gauge increase. We've been using him literally since he came out, because he's still really good. After the skill fusion, he's doing the whole non-limited convert, where any 2 not blue orbs get turned to blues. So it could be 2 oranges, it could be 2 greens, or it could be a special convert, 1 orange and 1 green, and they will turn into 2 blue orbs, and then still giving a 10% gauge increase. This is a really good skill. This is doing what Soe, Ogre's Pride Soe does, where he's got a non-restricted orb convert, could be 2 colors, and giving a gauge increase, and we know how good that skill is and how versatile it is, so we're now giving him that to Fountain Wisdom Rimuru, which I think is a great thing, and I probably will skill fuse him. I don't know if I'll do a showcase on it, because it's just an orb change, but it's certainly going to make him even more useful now in chances where you get a lot of green orbs on a turn or something. Fantasy Milim is a character not a lot of people use nowadays, because she is just a pure single target DPS with very little value for any other team. You need to build a team around her. She doesn't do anything for anybody else. And to, build on top of that, they've skill fused her damage skill. So currently, she gives herself 30% attack and starts at 25% crit damage. And every time you use a battle skill from any unit, you will get an extra 3% crit damage until the end of turn 4. So turn 1, you use 2 skills. Turn 2, you use 4 skills. Turn 3, you use 3 skills. Turn 4, you use a bunch of skills. And you can get Milim up to like 67 or 61% crit damage. And it's, it's really good. 60% crit damage is really high. Now, after skill fusion, they've bumped everything up. So now she gives herself 30% attack, a 5% increase, and then she starts at 30% crit damage, and then every skill gives her 5% crit damage. So now she's going to hit even harder, because she's starting at a higher base level, and she's increasing by a higher amount. So 30, 35, 40. You could get up to probably like 80 or 90% crit damage now, if you're really lucky and you're running a team that has really, really low cost skills, and maybe if you factor in a rewind as well. It's good for her and literally nobody else, but I don't know of really anybody using Fantasy Milim to nuke in this current day and age. So I'm not going to see too much value out of this unless they really bring back a lot of content that needs a single target nuker that we don't already have access to, which water is kind of down in the dumps right now, so maybe we will need her coming up soon. I don't know. Kind of depends. Okay, our third Lumi on this list. You notice that there's a lot of Lumis that get her skill fusions, and not a lot of them are very good. Wind Lumi, it did get a good skill fusion. Light Lumi is a joke. Warrior's Mind Space Lumi, this is affecting her gimmick as well. So her gimmick is that for 70 points, when you already have a protection gauge ready to go, you could use the skill, and it pretty much gives you a free protector. So on your most optimized turn, you could use this, and you can get 3 uses of your protector, which you're meant to use her on a stacking team, so that's 3 stacks of your protector when normally you can only do 2. So this could really supercharge your buffs. This could supercharge the skill point gain you get on whatever colored orb you're running her with. And it is a gimmick, and it's expensive, but it does give her some value on some blue stacking team that wants physical and wants crit. So now, on top of the 10% gauge increase for protection gauge increase for all orbs, now they've cut the cost down to 30 points. So they've dropped it by over half, because it used to be 70. Now it's 30. So that's already a big win right there. It still gives the extra free protection gauge, and then it increases blue gauges by 50%. No longer 10%, but it's 50, which is really huge for blue orbs, giving you extra protection gauge, because this means that not only can you use 2 or 3 protectors that turn, but it's going to help you get even more protection gauge the following turn, when hopefully you send 6 blue orbs after you activate this. So this is actually a really good skill fusion, but it is still very gimmicky, and you're only going to use it on a blue stacking team that needs a physical and crit unit, because her other skill is physical buff and crit resistance down. So you gotta really work for the team to get her to be overly useful with this skill fusion. Okay. I think this is the first skill fusion for an objectively very, very good unit that I'm not really on board with. So, Warrior's Mind Guy, he's been a mainstay on a lot of teams ever since he came out for the 1.5 anniversary. Triple orb change, 2 greens and an orange into 3 blues. He's got 80% ult damage, and for physical, he gives guaranteed crits. Like, he's doing a lot, and he's been really good ever since he came out over a year ago. And they are skill fusing his orb change, which, like I said, changes 2 greens and an orange into 3 blue orbs, and then gives you a 10% gauge increase, as most converts do. After the skill fusion, they dropped the cost of the skill down from 30 to 25, so they did make it cheaper, but they changed the gauge increase to stacking crit resistance down. I'm not a super big fan of that, because if you've ever used Commander Hinata or someone else whose conversion skill doesn't have a 10% gauge increase, it really makes a difference on turn 2. So if you use Guy turn 1 and you've got the big 3 and you've got a lot of protection gauge going on already, if you use his orb change as it is right now with the 10% gauge increase, you would get past 50 points. So if you needed to use it again the next turn, you could. But without that gauge increase, without that extra little bit of protection gauge, without that little bit of skill points, it really puts you down. Because now you're going to get 48 skill points, and you're not going to have enough unless they drop the cost down. But at the same time, you're not going to get that extra little bit of protection gauge, so maybe you don't get a double protector on turn 2. You're going to be a protector and like a nut tap away from having a double, which is really not going to feel that great. So I don't know if having a stacking crit resistance down is worth it, when a lot of the times I'm not using him for his crit. It's very powerful if you're going to use him for his alt buff with his guaranteed crit for physical, but there are times I want to bring this guy and I don't give 2 shits about crit resistance. I care about gauge increases. So I'm not super on board with this skill. I'd have to see someone else use him and then make my decision, but I'm certainly not going to skill fuse him myself right now, because I don't know if I'd like this. I would rather keep it at 5 cost higher and get that gauge rather than crit resistance down, which I may not ever use. We're getting close to the end, I promise you. SM Milim, one of the biggest powerhouses of Valor Cup DPS since she came out in summer of 2023. She is having her attack buff skill fuse. Currently, for 2 turns, she gives herself 25% attack and 25% dark attack. And in Valor Cup, when combined with other buffs, that was plenty. It's a 50% buff overall, and she could nuke down everyone on the front line and still have left over to do normal orb damage to take out whoever was left in the back. That's very good. She's still, I mean, if you really don't care about Valor Cup, she can still wipe the field. Like, this has not changed. You can still wipe the field with her. After the skill fusion, they didn't really do that much. They gave her an extra 5% to her own attack buff, and now change it to all dark attack, all allies dark attack 25%. So she gained 5% on her attack, and now she's giving dark attack to everybody, not just herself. I don't think this is a very good skill fusion. I'm not using her to help support other people. I'm using her to nuke, and she does it fine already. 5% extra is not going to make any difference. And the fact she's giving it to other dark allies, if you're nuking with Milim, they're meant to die. The other characters are not going to get a chance to attack. So I don't understand this skill fusion and why it exists. It's such low amounts. It doesn't do anything. So I'm really not on board with this one. I could be wrong. Someone could be like, but now she's got so much extra value. It's like, yeah, but are you bringing this Summer Milim to help buff dark allies when she's not the focus of the team? No. No. I'll answer that for you right now. Don't lie to me. No, you're not. You're bringing another character who's giving like 80% dark attack. So, yeah, not on board with this one. And finally, the final Lumi, the 4th Lumi of this batch of skill fusions. This is affecting her alt buff. Now, this Summer Lumi was memed into the ground because she's just not that good. She wasn't good when she came out. She was limited because this skill requires you to use 5 protection gauges in order to cap it out. Because it starts at 50% for fire and dark alt damage. Specifically fire and dark. And then every time you used a protection skill, you got an extra 10%, and it capped out at 100. So you had to use a protector 5 times to get 50% to do 100% extra alt damage for 2 different elements. And she lowered fire and dark resistance by 10%. Like, whoop-de-fucking-do. If you're not running a team that really cycles protection gauge that well, you're better off running a different character that gives you 70% alt damage for not doing anything. So, this was not a good skill, and it was not looked upon very well when she released. Well, they tried to fix that with her skill fusion by keeping it the same cost, and just eliminating the requirement to use protection gauge. Now she just gives fire and dark allies 100% alt gauge, just right off the bat. And then they gave her another 40% to her resistance down, so now it's 50% fire and dark down. I mean, it got easier to use, because it doesn't require you to have 5 protection skills within, a certain number of turns, which she's meant to be on a burst team. So, yeah, okay. It is better. It's still kind of the same, though, because even if you were to cap out the old skill versus this skill, the only difference would be the extra 40% dark resistance down or fire resistance down. And if you watched my Dark Shinsha showcase, where they gave her 50% resistance down, it does not add that much damage. Like, it gave them like an extra 30k on an alt that did 600,000. Whoop-de-doo. This is not a strong increase to this skill. It made it easier to use, thank God. But as far as additional support, you're gonna get 50k damage off of it. Maybe more if you're doing like millions of damage because of all your other buffs. I don't really. It's not very good still. It's still not very good. It is easier to use. I'm still not going to use her, though. That's the thing. Is that just because they made it easier to use does not mean I'm magically going to be like, oh, let's put her on every team that is Dark and Fire. No, I'm not going to do that. You know what's more impactful? That Fire Guy skill fusion we talked about like half an hour ago, where it's only Fire, where it's 100%, but I guarantee you that 40% crit damage shits all over this Dark and Fire resistance by 50%. Absolutely destroys this skill. So, congratulations, EX Summer Lumi. You've really outdone yourself. The Bandai Namco employee who hates Lumi strikes again. But that is the end of the 18 different skill fusions. This is a long video. We had a lot to talk about. I had many opinions to give. If one caught your fancy and you're like, Joker, I think you're being a little too harsh on Summer Lumi, or I think you're being a little too harsh on EX Guy, let me know in the comments. I have not skill fused any of these characters yet, because I'm just now getting to this video, and I didn't really know what half of them did still. So, my opinion could be swayed. Let me know what you think in the comments. But that's it for me, guys. Take it easy. And I'm going to go to bed because it's after midnight. Bye, guys.